Welcome to Getting Ghosted, an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast. I'm your host, Allie Horner. Do you have a story that you want to submit to the Getting Ghosted podcast? Maybe you've had a spooky experience or a visit from a loved one. Maybe you got a sign at exactly the right time from your angels or guides. And maybe your intuition told you to turn one way instead of the other, and it ended up saving your life or putting you right in the place where you needed to be. Well, if you have one of those stories, or if you have any questions that you would like to submit for the podcast to be answered by myself and my guides in a potential future episode, feel free to use the link at intuitivesoulcollective.com/the-podcast. It's also linked up in the show notes. Submit your questions there, and that will be the perfect place for us to be able to take a look at them and see if we'll share your story or question on a later podcast. Welcome back, everybody. It's Allie. I am back. I have been hit with a pretty bad bug, possibly even COVID. So if I sound a little bit congested or nasally today, I promise you, mostly I feel fine. It's just kind of this little lingering thing, but that might be why I sound a little bit congested today. So for today's episode, something that Eric really wanted to bring through, and my other guides as well. I have Jonathan here, and I also have one of my guides. I call her Serena, and then I have Grace over here as well. They're just kind of lining up, and to explain how they work with me, a lot of the times the guides will stand in sort of a semicircle around me, or one will step forward, one person's loved one or one person's guide when I'm doing a reading. Right now, I have several of them here. And it's a really powerful group. They just keep saying over and over, we're ready to go. So they brought forward the topic of working with synchronicity and signs. And if you've ever been on my TikTok lives or you've ever worked with me personally, you know that I've said it time and time again, but one of the best ways to learn about how your intuition works and to learn about connection with the other side is to hear other people's stories, because a lot of times we just don't know what's possible for us, and we might miss a lot of synchronicities or signs or messages from the other side or our loved ones and guides and angels, because we literally just don't know what to look for. Most people think that when they're connecting with the other side, it's always going to be some huge booming message, or they're going to hear something clairaudiently in the person's voice, or they're going to see them standing in front of them. That's just not the case all the time. Sometimes those things absolutely do happen, but not all the time. So one of the things that they always tell me is we want to share stories about how synchronicities and signs work. So now they're stepping forward, and Eric is coming forward, and he said, so one of the key ways that your guides work with you is actually through intuitions, nudges, and he's saying little teeny inklings, little teeny bits of signs. He's like, those are the types of things that people tend to kind of go, that's not enough. Not for me. That's not good enough. That's not clear enough. I'm not sure how to interpret that. He said a lot of people write him off. Like they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm seeing that right. I'm just making that up in my head. But really, no, he's going, your gut instinct is one thing. It's more for survival, and you can actually misread it or misinterpret it. He's going, your intuition, though, that's a big deal, because that's something where once you're operating out of intuition, you're operating in almost a higher state of consciousness that's coming and dropping down into your physiological and physical state. And so it's way easier for you to operate out of intuition if you are in a much more open-minded, curious state. If you are really closed off to possibilities, opportunities, and options, if you're really like it's this way or the highway, or it's black and white, this or that. He said, if you're really, really biased in your thinking, or you have really strict or confining belief systems, and you're not in what we would call more of a growth mindset, you're going to have a harder time with signs and synchronicities. Like you're just going to miss them more often. So what he's saying is that signs and synchronicities, those little like moments where things just seem to happen right at the right time. You happen to walk into a coffee shop, and suddenly the book that's been getting recommended to you by everyone and their mother is on the shelf for free. Or someone you're meant to meet pops in right at the right time in your life, right when you're open to meeting someone. And it's because you just happen to change your route to work that day, and you ended up walking a different way than you would normally walk. He said, these are the little ways that the universe works with you. It's because we come in and he goes, it's almost like we're up in heaven, we're pressing these little buttons like, and now, and he's pressing the button and saying, turn left instead of right. He said, when you get these little pulls or nudges, almost like you got a lasso around the middle, a little bounce in your step, a little feeling of, I don't know why I just got to go this way today. I don't know why I just got to phone a friend right now. I don't know why I just feel like I need to buy this thing right now. And he said, it ends up being this really clear signal from the other side when you look at it in hindsight and you start to learn how it works. He's like, but most people, they don't really get that. They don't really understand that that's what could be going on. So your intuition is actually a way for your guides to kind of plug in and work with you. And he's like, and he said, now again, we're benevolent beings. We're all love up here. And he keeps saying hate and anger and fear, things like that. Shame, resent, guilt, any sort of like lying or manipulative energy is, he said, that's a denser energy. So that only exists in human experience. It does not exist in spirit's experience because spirits are, he's showing them glowing and hovering. And he said that, he said that we're non-physical up there. He's like up here. And he said, well, actually, technically we're where you are, but in a very different state of that existence. And he said, we are technically non-physical beings. So in order for us to stay in this non-physical state, he said, we literally cannot choose anything that would be manipulative or hurtful, because he said physiologically, if you look at physics, it can't exist up here. And he said, it's really difficult to explain when you're in 3D. And he said, when you're in 3D, it's difficult to understand 4D, 5D, or any dimension above that. He said, even consciously, it's really hard to wrap your head around it, because even if you try to visualize it, you're still going to visualize a 3D state. And that's just not how it is. And so he's going, so now that you know that, where you're all loving spirit squad, power posse, number one fan beings, we're assigned to you since before birth. You're assigned to us in some lifetimes to come and guide us as well. And he's saying, we will never do anything to put you in harm's way. And he said, actually, we are here to help with the highest and best for all of humanity. And that's why we work with humans. And what's happening with the big shift is more and more of you are going to be aware of us and able to connect with us in the future. And more of your children that are being born will be able to hear us and connect with us as well. And he's going, now back to our original topic of signs and synchronicities. Now, these are fun and exciting to find. And they're also really important because they can give you that next little nudge. And he said, it's almost like having a navigational system, like an inner GPS. He's saying it's almost, and he's showing a compass radiating from his chest out. And he said, that's your way of knowing your true north. And he said, your guides know where your true north is. And we're always trying to guide you back to it. And he is saying, now, if you're more wrapped up in the confines of society, you're more concerned about societal conditioning, what your parents want, what your friends are doing, what's quote unquote right or normal according to other people. He just keeps going. He said, some of you get wrapped up with keeping up with the Joneses and stuff like that. And he goes, that's when you're going to get a little off of your true north. And he said, but the best thing is we can always bring you back to it, though it just may take some time for people. And he goes, and some people are meant to kind of deter a little bit away so that they can have the experience of understanding what that feels like. And then when they get back on their path and really follow that true north, now they have a whole bunch of information where they can guide other people on their true north. And he's saying there's so many people where they have experiences where it's like, hey, I can only learn how to listen to myself by experimenting with what happens when I don't listen to myself and my intuition. And so he's saying your guides often we will not guide you to not listen to your intuition, but we might guide you to have a lot of really new experiences. And he said, if you're trying to play it safe all the time, you're going to miss them. And that brings us to the signs and synchronicities. Now, if you're having a lot of synchronicities, you know things are rolling, momentum's going, I'm on the right path, everything's lining up for me, I'm in the right place at the right time, because synchronicities work with the universe working in a co-creation with you. He said that's when you really are like, okay, I'm rolling out the blueprint. Here we go. This is exactly where I need to go on my map from one point in the destination to the other, and I'm on the highest and best route there that's going to be the easiest and the most powerful and the most fun, and it's going to get me there in the best and highest way possible. He said, now again, if you are really wrapped up in a lot of, he said maybe he's showing criticism, shame, like over the self-criticism, and he's showing me he keeps saying, if you are wrapped up in that type of energy, and so you're more concerned when you're feeling those things like shame and self-doubt, and you're criticizing yourself a lot, you're worried, you have more anxiety and more stress, worried about doing things wrong, that's when you're most likely to miss signs and synchronicities, because you are kind of farther away from what feels right in terms of your inner compass and your true north. And he keeps saying, now there's no shame in that. He's going, your guides don't judge you. We don't exist in judgment. That's a human thing. He said, we are simply here to go, hey, wait, come back over here. We don't judge why you're making certain decisions. We will always try to guide you back to the highest and best path. And he said, we even work with people who do some real bad shit on earth. And he said, we really try to get them back to their true north. And he said that's something that is really near and dear to many of us, especially those of us who are really here to help steer the direction of humanity toward a higher and better future. He said, a lot of you are here on earth as our counterparts, in a sense, to kind of play that out and help that evolution and that change happen or shift happen. And he said, on that note, thank you all for doing so. But your signs and synchronicities are really important to pay attention to, because they tell you if you're on track and on path or not. Now, signs and synchronicities are happening. He goes, they're happening all the damn time. But if you are all wrapped up in self-doubt and criticism and shame, if you are stressed the F out, or you're walking around, you're on your phone all day, and you're not looking up and looking at the world around you, you're going to miss a lot of them. They're still there. Your guides are like trying to give you a whole bunch of signs. We're throwing them at you. He said sometimes we're like beaning you with signs, and he's showing someone throwing a paper airplane at someone's back and it hits their back, but they don't notice. He said, we are trying so hard to get messages and signs to you, to get those little signals and nudges to you, but you really have to be okay with going a little bit outside of the path that you think you're always supposed to be on. And he said, if you feel like your day to day is feeling like dog poop, you can bet your ass you're not listening to your intuition, because your intuition is probably trying to tell you what to do that's actually going to be better for you. When you're doing things that feel really bad every day, or you're living life in a way that feels not good for you, you're more likely to get sick and get tripped up and experience chronic stress, and you're going to get more confused and have issues thinking clearly. He keeps saying, and your intuition's still there. Your guides are still there working with you. You're still getting those signs, but you're probably just not paying attention to them, or you're misreading them, or thinking, I can't go the way that I really want to go, or I can't do that. That's too far outside of the norm. What would people say? Oh my God, what if I do that and I really F it up? And he's saying, well, I mean, if you're already not happy, how much more could you really F things up, right? And he said, you deserve to be filled with joy and happiness. And he said, that's actually the true state for humans, but many of you have forgotten that because of the dimension that you exist in. There's so much more density. It's kind of different for you from your spiritual self, and it's hard to hold that essence and understand that soul self or spiritual self. And he said, but children do. Children are great at holding on to their spiritual selves, and I keep thinking to myself, that's absolutely true. I think about my son when he was little, and he just was so connected. And every child, I used to love to babysit. I've always loved kids, and I used to babysit and nanny a lot when I was younger. It was very obvious to me that a lot of these kids were just so much more tuned in than I think what we would expect. So case in point with these children as well, they're going to be so sensitive and so tuned in. It's going to be incredibly important that we are listening to our intuition around them. And that is one of the things that that Eric is really, and the group is really impressing upon us. And I have Grace stepping forward as well. She's showing me that the more compassion you have for yourself, and the more open-heartedness and open-mindedness that comes from the state of grace, and giving yourself grace, right? So not being self-judgment, doubting, criticizing, not second guessing yourself. When you exist in that kind of more open-minded and curious state where you're just like, well, let's just see what happens today. Well, I don't know what I don't know. Let's just stay open to it. That's when you're going to see the most intuitions, and messages and guidance from the other side coming in. That's when you're going to have the highest creative output. That is when you're going to find yourself feeling a little more bounce in your step, that is when you're going to be most likely to follow your intuitions, not just receive them, but really follow those intuitions and those nudges. And that's when you're going to be most open and able to follow through on any changes that you need to make in life. And so when it comes to synchronicities, those are the kinds of things where they just unfold right at the right time, right? Again, it's like you end up right in the right place at the right time. Every time I followed a pull or a nudge, I always end up in the right place. There have even been times where I noticed a number of things happening all at the same time and being mentioned all at the same time. And that's what guided me to realize, like, oh, this is really going on in the world right now, or this is something that's going on collectively, or this is something I need to pay attention to in my own life because I'm seeing it repeated over and over throughout the world around me. Your guides will also work with the things that will be most noticeable for you in terms of signs and synchronicity as well. So sometimes you can set a specific sign with your guides or your loved ones on the other side, and sometimes they will work with where they know you're most likely to be looking and what you're most drawn to or interested in. So for example, I love to read. I'm a voracious reader, and I love to even just listen to books on Audible when I'm on a good hike or driving up to the mountains or driving home to visit family in Chicago. So one of the things that they will give me are different books to listen to that are going to help me on my path. So for example, a really long time ago when I was going through my kind of spiritual reawakening, which you can hear about in a previous episode, I walked into a Barnes and Noble, and it was, I was holiday shopping, and for all intents and purposes, I thought I was there to be shopping for other people. But the second I walked in, it was like there was a lasso around me, and I walked right up to one of those display tables right up in the front, and I saw Tyler Henry's book sitting right there. And I picked it up and I went, this is for me. I just knew right off the bat. But at that point in time, I was not interested in mediumship. I didn't really think much about it, talk to anyone much about it. I didn't know that much about it. I wasn't trying to be a medium. I didn't really read things like that. But I just knew I have to pick up this book right now. And I tore through that book in maybe 2.5, 3 days. And as I was reading it, there were a lot of things in his book where I went, oh yeah, I remember that now. And it was as though I had always known many of the things that he was talking about when he was referencing the way that he worked with the other side, or things that he knew to be true about the afterlife and things like that. I started to go, oh yeah, duh. But for all intents and purposes, like I said, I had had that turned off for a really long time. No one was teaching me about it. No one had talked to me about it. I had never read any books where people were explaining how the other side works. That wasn't stuff that was of interest to me for a really long time when I was growing up. And so I didn't really know much about it. And yet it was like I remembered it the second I started reading it. So that's a perfect example of a synchronicity coming in right at the right time and right when you need it, because that was another one of those books that kicked off my intuitive journey. Same thing with Laura Lynn Jackson's book, The Light Between Us, as well as many other books that have come into my life. So every time that there's something that I need to be kind of more being open to or integrating in my life, I will usually find a book that pertains to it. And it's almost kind of a running joke with my friends. I'm the person that people come to when they're like, they need a good book recommendation. I tend to just know what book is really the right book for them. And even recently, I picked up a book where the very first chapter introduces a woman who owns a little used bookstore, and I love used books. And her special talent and special skill is that whenever someone comes in and they tell her about what's going on in their life, she just knows intuitively exactly which books they should read to help them through that time period that they're in, or the experience or event that they're going through in life, or certain emotions that they're struggling with. And so of course I picked that up and I started chuckling, because I went, oh yes, my guides of course wanted me to read this book, because they knew that I would get the hint that this is another thing that I do as well. And so that is something that happens to me all the time. I will never forget. So in Colorado, obviously there's a lot of outdoor sports community and stuff like that. Some people are kind of more just, light skiers, hikers, etc. And then other people are much more into extreme stuff. They want to go, climb Everest and do all that type of stuff. They're base jumping, etc. So for me, I tend to be on the lighter side of things, but I do love to learn about the spiritual side of outdoor sports, because I think a lot of people don't know how prevalent intuition and wild psychic experiences and third man syndrome and stuff like that is in the really extreme outdoor sports arena. And so there was one day, and I remember it was years ago, I was walking around Cheeseman Park, if anyone's familiar with that, and I just knew, and I remember it was snowing that day. It was in the winter time. And again, it was not long before Christmas. And I knew I had to walk on this one side street that I didn't normally go down. And I walked past a little free library box, and it was like something spun me around by the shoulders. And I turned around and I was like, no, I need to go back. There's something in there for me. Opened it up, and there was this amazing book in there. It's called Explorers of the Infinite: The Secret Spiritual Lives of Extreme Athletes and What They Reveal About Near-Death Experiences, Psychic Communication, and Touching the Beyond. It's by Maria Coffey, and I swear to Jeebus, I grabbed that book and went, this is it. This is the book for me. And I fell in love with it right away because it, the stories that were in it and the way that her writing blended all of these spiritual and psychic and telepathic experiences and even mediumship experiences where people were communicating with their loved ones who had long since passed, or in some cases just passed. She combined all of that with some scientific research and anecdotes about what's going on in the brain and in the body, in addition to what hasn't been explained by science yet. And I loved reading all that because I have had so many more spiritual experiences ever since I started hanging out in nature more, which it started after I moved to Colorado, which was about 15 years ago now. So, that was a book that I absolutely was meant to read. But from what I understand, it's out of print. So usually you can only get it if it's a used copy, from what I understand. And so that was another case of synchronicity where I was right in the right place at the right time. And now a book like that might not be super of interest to even a lot of people who are into mediumship or psychic stuff or ghosty stuff, because it's more about, outdoor athletes and stuff like that. But for someone like me who lives in Colorado and loves to go skiing and hiking and trail running, I was literally just trail running this morning. I mean, that's my jam, not on the extreme side, obviously, but that type of stuff is my jam. So it was like my guides knew this is exactly in the right place at the right time for someone like you. And they knew it was going to be entertaining for me and that it was going to help fill in some gaps in information that I was going to need. There was another time where the book, The Surrender Experiment, kept coming up and I was really, really resistant to it. And Eric is over here kind of chuckling and tapping his fingers together, kind of like Mr. Burns used to in The Simpsons. And he said, yeah, resistance is futile. And he's doing the evil laugh. But he said, yeah, a lot of people experience resistance, even when the signs are all there and they're all lining up and they're all adding up and we're just torpedoing you with them, or you're getting tons and tons of synchronicities. It's really common to experience resistance to things. And I noticed this in readings as well, because I've been doing readings for the better part of 10 years now. And I can't tell you how often people experience resistance to what their guides are saying and to all of the things that are adding up and lining up, even though they're paying for a reading and their guides are confirming, like, yes, they're seeing the signs. Yes, this all signs point to go. And you got it. They still will have resistance to doing the thing, even though they're seeing all those signs and getting all those nudges from the universe. And so for me, The Surrender Experiment was one of those books where I was like, really? Do I really need to read this one? I think it was because my brain couldn't wrap itself around the word surrender and actually enjoy it. But that book just kept coming up, and it was like random people would mention it to me, and then I would see someone posting it online, and then I would see it on a shelf at a bookstore and be like, man, this book just keeps coming up. At the time, I told my guides, if you can get this book to me for free, like put it right in front of my face, give me a really loud and clear sign that I need to read this right now, I will pick it up and I will read it. And so they put a copy, not 2 days later, again, in a little free library. So there was no more avoiding it. I finally said, okay, finally, I guess I'll do it. And I started reading it, and then I actually downloaded it on Audible because at that time I was driving up to the mountains a ton for different purposes, and partially for work and partially for fun stuff. And so I started listening to it on my drives, and I just ate that book up. And it made so many things click into place in my brain because it's an autobiographical book about what happens when you stop listening to the voice of fear and the voice of judgment in your mind all the time. And I saw how interesting this guy's life became when he stopped listening to that voice of fear. And it just made such a profound difference for me because even though I had a pretty deep spiritual practice at that time and had overcome a lot of my fears and anxieties through it, there was still a couple of judgments that I was hanging on to. And I kind of just say with judgment to err is human, like, you know, we need judgment to like know not to put our hand on a hot stove and stuff like that. But I do think sometimes we might judge and assume too much and not ask enough questions and be open-minded enough. And so that book helped me get on another level in terms of what happens when we let go or quote unquote surrender. And so that's another example of where synchronicity put me right in the right place at the right time to meet the right, or to read the right book. There's also one point in time where I would get these intuitions to go places by myself and go get a glass of wine or get a coffee. And that's something where, you know, I used to have really severe social anxiety when I was younger. So it'd be like, hell no, thank you. But I finally started giving into that a while back, years and years ago, and started going to places more and more by myself. And I've met several friends because I was out and about doing things on my own. Just a couple years ago, I had this really strong nudge to go to a wine bar not far from my house. Wandered over there thinking, oh, you know, maybe this is just going to be a nice little glass of wine and some dinner for myself. Who knows? But I sat down, and then these two gals sat down right next to me. We all started chatting. And now one of them is one of my really good friends, and she and I have been friends since then. So it was like my guide said, hey, you've been wanting to meet more people and you're trying to find people who are interested in the same things. And let's introduce you to your friend, and I won't say her name on here, but that's exactly who she ended up being. And after she and I, started chit-chatting and I told her what I did for work, she went, oh my God, my friend passed away a while back and his name is, and I'll just say Jesse. And she said, do you think you could do a reading for me with him? And right away, I felt Jesse come in and I recognized that I had actually, when I was brushing my teeth one day, like 6 months before meeting this friend of mine, I had been brushing my teeth and this boy, Jesse, had come through from the other side and said, you're going to meet one of my friends soon and you guys are going to be really good friends and she's going to ask to talk to me. And I remember distinctly this guy with a backwards hat and brown hair that was like kind of flipping out from under the hat. And he was a younger kid, like maybe late teens, early 20s. And I knew immediately that he had had an overdose. And so I had completely forgotten that had happened. But then when I met my friend at the wine bar for the first time, and she started talking about Jesse not long after that, he came back in and I went, oh my God, I was meant to meet her. And so that's a perfect example of when you follow those little nudges and signs and everything, you're going to have more synchronicities, like meeting the right people at the right time. And I think that's a really fun one where it's like a fun example of where you listen to the other side. And, you know, sometimes we might even forget things that they've said, but it always makes sense later. Like they never get it wrong. And so even in that case, I recognize like, oh, Jesse was trying to get me to meet his friend to help her, but also because I was ready to meet more friends around me who are interested in the same things that I'm interested in. So yeah, so case in point, following those signs and synchronicities can be a really beautiful, wonderful thing for people when they're more open-minded to it. So do your best to try and stay open. And you could always tell your guides, hey, I want to work with signs and synchronicities in a way that'll be fun and exciting. Make it fun, make it playful, make it funny. Let's not like do anything crazy dramatic right away. And that might make it a little bit easier and help you open up a little bit more to working with the signs and synchronicities. We will do more podcast episodes on this in the very near future. And I will have more people who have submitted stories or who want to come on the podcast I will have those stories shared, or those people come on to talk about different signs, synchronicities, how things unfolded for them, all sorts of stuff. Eric just hinted at there are a lot of meet cutes that happen right at the right time, when people follow those little signs or synchronicities, or follow those little intuitive nudges. So is a really good, those are always a really good thing to work with, because they can help you get on the highest and best path for you. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening today. Just remember, I have the Patreon is open. That'll be linked in the show notes. I also, again, with TikTok, people are saying with the TikTok ban, they're a little worried because a lot of people find me through TikTok. That's part of why I started this podcast. It feels very up in the air to me in terms of the TikTok ban, but just in case, feel free to listen to the podcast here or get in touch with me on my website. I also have my membership group for people that want to come and hang there and chit chat with each other and just hang out with some like-minded people. So that is available as well. And again, thank you guys so much for your patience today with my kind of nasally voice, but hopefully by the next podcast episode, we'll be feeling a lot better. Eric is doing a bow, and he said, I bid you adieu.